Hello and welcome to the 2017 Personal Health Summit. If you're looking to become healthier and happier than you've ever been before, then you've come to the right place. The Personal Health Summit features an international collaboration of leading doctors, scientists, researchers, and health ambassadors, all working to change the conversation and transform world health. Every expert here is to share with you their knowledge, wisdom, and expertise to help you learn, grow, and become empowered to make informed choices and take control of your health and your life. Our mission, first and foremost, is to help you recognize that you are unique, that there are many different avenues to achieving and maintaining optimal health, and that there is one that's right for you at this very moment in time. Being informed is being empowered. And when you have the right information, you have the power to change your health, your happiness, and your life. The Personal Health Summit is made possible by the generous support of the Ultimate Human Foundation, who's committed to educating and empowering people all over the globe to be proactive about their personal health, providing truly personalized health solutions for every human being on the planet with accessibility and affordability, and orchestrating and nurturing a global gathering of the world's key health experts and thought leaders at the vanguard of their respective fields, where solutions can be found to transform the future health of humanity. The Personal Health Summit is also made possible by ph360.me, the world's most advanced health assistant that interacts with you via your smartphone, just like a best friend who can calculate the best nutrition and lifestyle choices to most favorably and easily influence your unique hormones, genes, and personal state of health, empowering you to make easy, accurate lifestyle decisions to improve your sleep, energy, mood, weight, digestion, and well-being. Today's guest, I'm really excited to introduce Dr. John Berardi. He's a co-founder of Precision Nutrition. He's an advisor to Apple, to Equinox, to Nike, and to Titleist. He has columns on livestrong.com and the huffingtonpost.com. And he was recently selected as one of the 20 smartest fitness professionals in the world and one of the 100 most influential people in fitness. Over the last 10 years, Precision Nutrition has become the world's largest online nutrition coaching and certification company. John, thank you so much for being here. We're very excited for this conversation today.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro. I really appreciate that. And thank you for having me. I love the opportunity to just talk with everyone who's watching, listening, whatever they're doing, and hopefully impart some insight on how they can live healthier lives or help other people do that.
Beautiful. John, let's jump straight into this conversation. I'm really excited for it. Straight off the bat, let's bust some myths about food, about diets. What is the best nutrition plan for the masses to follow? Is it the paleo diet? Is it the Mediterranean diet? Is it the Atkins diet? Where do we start here? Where do we go? What's going on?
Yeah, well, the first thing I like to do is get our heads right around the question, because this idea that there's a best thing. I wonder, if someone, pick any hobby, anyone who's watching or listening to this is into, what's the best way to do that, right? The question becomes absurd when you become sort of an expert or hobbyist in an area, because you realize there is really no best way. There are probably a lot of good ways. There's probably a lot of really bad ways too. And when it comes to diet, that's no different. Now I understand why some people are promoting one thing is the best. Either they have some kind of interest, in other words, something to sell or a business to promote, or, and this is more likely the case, I think there's fewer charlatans than there are people who had a particular experience with a diet or a lifestyle intervention that really worked for them. So maybe they had a very unhealthy lifestyle. And when I say unhealthy, I don't mean that as a moral judgment. I mean it just, they weren't looking, feeling, performing the way that they wanted to. And they found a thing, a way of eating, a set of rules or guidelines that worked for them. And early on in your journey, when that happens, you feel so excited and enthused and changed, evangelical even, and you want to tell everyone about it. And that becomes a problem, though, because A, it's early in your journey and you haven't seen the long-term effects of it. Not that they'd be bad, but you're not quite sure. And then the second thing is, when you make the assumption that because something worked for you once, that it'll work for you always and forever, and it'll work for everyone else in the same way. It just doesn't work that way. And, I should give just a tiny bit of my background before I start delving into this, So Precision Nutrition is a company I've run for 15 years now. And over those 15 years, we've coached 50,000 clients online. so a lot of people, to help them lose over 1 million pounds of body fat, improve their health and improve their performance. So we have a lot of experience. And the one unique thing about coaching online is that you have so much data, not just weight loss data and blood chemistry, but interaction with the program, compliance and consistency data, and all this other kind of information. In fact, ours is the world's largest body transformation data project. We have millions and millions of data points. And then over the last few years, we've actually done an outreach project where we allow or we work with coaches to deliver this curriculum and coaching program to their clients. And they've coached about 100,000 people. So all told, through our curriculum and our methodology, we've coached about 150,000 people. So we have a lot of data points to answer this very question: what works best for people? And the answer we've come up with is maybe sometimes an unsatisfying one, based on how some people think about the question, because normally this question really is asking, what are the detailed particulars of what I should be eating? And I say what very intentionally, what I should be eating. What food should I eat? What food should I avoid? That's what nutrition is about, right? And the answer has become for us, no, it's actually not. More important than what you should be eating in many cases is how you're eating, because how will govern what. And I'll give you an example of that. One of the first practices that we work with clients on, and this spans the full range. I mean, we work with Olympians and professional sports teams and amateur athletes, all the way down to people who've never exercised a day in their lives. And the thing that universally they all will struggle with is how they eat, because eating isn't just a biochemical, physiological act. It's a mental, emotional, social, psychological act. So one of the first things we work on with them is slowing down their eating. Now, that's how you eat, not what you eat. And often, like I say, it's unsatisfying because they're like, well, yeah, but I eat really bad foods. Can you just tell me what not to eat and what to eat? And for us, what ends up happening is when we give people the daily practice, which it's not just slow down your eating, done. We actually have a cluster of exercises they do to help them do that, and then to check in on whether they're doing it effectively. So it's skill building, not just entreaty to slow down your eating. And by doing that, we end up helping people become more mindful of what they're eating. They tend to eat less in most circumstances, and they develop this particular skill of tuning into their own hunger and appetite cues. And that alone helps set the stage for making better food choices down the line. In fact, sometimes they don't even have to intentionally try and change what they eat. They just slow down their eating, and it feels like it kind of naturally changes. And we have a series of practices that build up. And eventually, of course, we talk about protein and carbohydrates and fats and all those things. But to sort of get, drill down to the heart of your question, the paleo diet, it's good for some people. A vegan diet, it's good for some people. Intermittent fasting, even a juice cleanse, in some cases can be good for some people in a very short, limited time window. The question becomes, if all these things could be good for some people, then whether you eat meat or not becomes irrelevant to the health outcome. Whether you eat high carbs or low carbs really does become irrelevant at a certain point if you're doing the things that transcend the macronutrient conversation and really speak to how you eat. So I'll even be more specific. If you look across history and across current cultural eating trends, you'll find they're wildly divergent. In other words, some people have success doing what feels like the exact opposite of other people. Now, if that's true, we can try and explain it away by saying, well, maybe they're genetically different. But that's not often the right explanation. What's often the case is that they are doing a bunch of things the same. You're just not looking at what they're doing the same. You're looking at what they're doing differently. So, we're looking at carbs, and that little sleight of hand there blocks us from seeing the things they're doing similarly. So if we look at all successful diets across, let's say, different cultures, Okay, in other words, ways of eating for people to not have too much body fat, to have a better health profile, to feel energy and vigor in their days. We end up finding that they do some things very similar, no matter what's on their plate. Generally, the best nutrition plans have what we talked about already, awareness. People are, in one way or another, just paying attention to what they eat. And the research bears this out. If you just start paying attention, you all of a sudden start making all these better choices, naturally, inherently. So that's the one thing. They help you pay better attention to what you're eating. And that alone, independent of what you're eating, makes a difference. The second thing is that they often correct nutritional deficiencies. Now, we're not talking about big, full-scale nutritional deficiencies like scurvy and things like that. We're talking about the subclinical deficiencies that people have nowadays, okay, due to too high calories and maybe too low nutrients. Now, if you look at paleo, for example, or even a good vegan diet, and we can set those up as, let's say, completely diametrically opposed in terms of, people's beliefs and maybe even some of their food choices. Whether it's true or not, let's just set them up for that argument's sake. When you look at those two, and in neither of those eating plans are they recommending lots of processed foods. The recommendation is whole, natural, largely unprocessed or minimally processed foods. So you start to see, wow, these guys have more in common than I originally thought. Whether they eat meat or not may not be as important as eating fewer heavily processed foods, eating more natural foods. So now we're talking about a set of criteria for what the best diet is, independent of macronutrients. So we have, attuneness to what you're eating, just paying attention. Then we have this idea of eliminating deficiencies through eating whole, minimally processed foods. And then these things just help us tune into our own appetite cues. The other thing that helps us tune into our appetite cues is totally unrelated to food. It's actually physical activity. There's a bunch of research now showing that when we're highly inactive, in other words, sitting at a desk all day like I am right now, we are less in tune with our own hunger and appetite and energy balance cues. When we do some minimal physical activity, and this doesn't mean train for an Ironman, this means just moving. It could be just a walk 30 minutes a day. We end up better tuning into hunger and appetite cues, therefore eating the right amounts for our body. So criterion 3 is movement. And most good nutritional plans recommend some movement, some physical activity as part of the whole intervention. So you can see, I'm going on and on about this, but I think in a very systematic way. And when I think about answering the question, what's the best diet? It just comes up for me that most people are thinking about the wrong variables when they ask that question. They're thinking about meat or not meat, carbs or not carbs. And since we see people thriving under all kinds of macronutrient conditions, the question becomes, what are those various people doing similarly? And what are those criteria? And again, I think the 3 big ones are paying attention. And that's not just an entreaty to pay attention or meditate or whatever. It's a skill to build through practices. So that's the first one, paying attention. 2 is eliminating deficiencies through whole, largely unprocessed foods. And 3 is movement so that you can tune into your own energy balance cues. Your body does a pretty magnificent job of finding energy balance if you're at least moderately active. If you're not, your brain goes haywire. It doesn't actually know how to find the correct energy balance. So you end up eating too much, you're not moving enough, and then the problems associated with being overweight crop up.
John, that's fascinating start, and thank you for sharing that insight with us. And you've got a PhD, you specialize in exercise physiology and nutrient biochemistry. And there's this emerging field of what we're known as nutrigenomics. That something, quite a lot about that. And can you just tell us a little about that for people who are listening right now? What are we discovering about how our genetics interact with our nutrition and what we eat? And can you just maybe talk through some examples of how people that are listening to this right now can start to be aware of this and start to incorporate some of these concepts, or at least be aware of the principles and philosophies behind that?
Yeah, I remember my early introduction to nutrigenomics. It was a fun little example. I met an early pioneer in the field in Toronto, and he was doing research on caffeine and coffee. And I remember, I think we met through a friend, and he was just telling me about his research, and he didn't know what I did. And then I started peppering him with questions, and I'm sure it was kind of weird and annoying. He's like, oh, no one's this interested in my field, right? And what he was researching was genetic polymorphisms. So basically, small genetic differences on one trait for caffeine metabolism. Now, this has become like an old hat kind of example, but there was a time when this was like, what? What are you talking about? So the idea was that we have either one gene variant or another in our liver's ability. It's a cytochrome, so it's the ability to process caffeine through our liver. And if you have one variant, you're a fast metabolizer of caffeine. And if you have another variant, you're a slow metabolizer of caffeine. And so why does that matter? Well, what they ended up finding in their research was that if you drink a moderate amount of coffee in a given day, and I drink a moderate amount of coffee in a day, and you're a fast metabolizer, you actually get a cardiovascular benefit from drinking coffee. And if I'm a slow metabolizer, my risk for heart disease goes up. So you have two people, let's say we're roughly the same age. We could even be twin brothers. And if you had the fast and I had the slow, the same amount of coffee would do radically different things in our body. Now, why? Well, the explanation the hypothesis that's been proposed is that coffee also has a host of antioxidants and things that are beneficial, but the caffeine itself may not be, based on how long it sticks around in our body. If you're a fast metabolizer, what happens is you drink your coffee and your body quickly gets rid of the caffeine, but the antioxidants and the other things stick around. So you get a health benefit without the risk. So your body sort of detoxifies the caffeine very quickly. But if I'm a slow metabolizer, the opposite happens. The caffeine sticks around for longer, and it may have effects on my sympathetic nervous system and my heart health and all this kind of a thing. Which the first thing that occurred to me was, oh my gosh, all the research on coffee and caffeine today is worthless, right? Because if you don't know if you have slow or fast metabolizers in your studies, and they didn't back then. I mean, the human genome was just categorized within the last 20, 25 years. Then basically, if you had an equal mix of slow and fast metabolizers, they cancel each other out. If this one particular study had more fast, then you get a particular result. And if this one had more slow, you get another result. And no wonder the research doesn't make any sense on caffeine and coffee, because people have fundamental differences. And I don't know about you, but this got me super excited about the possibilities. And now we've learned so much more since then, about the processing of saturated fat in the body, for example. Some people have a genetic variant where saturated fat does almost nothing to raise their blood lipids. Triglycerides stay in check, LDLs are fine, HDLs aren't abnormal, but there's another variant, another gene variant you can have where eating saturated fat makes all your blood lipids go haywire. Now, we don't know how important that is to overall health, but we do know it's a metric that physicians use. And again, we could be twin brothers, you have that slightly different variant, and you go in for a checkup and we eat the same way, and your blood work looks great and mine looks horrible. So, I mean, that's exciting. Now, where we're at right now, unfortunately, we don't know a lot about what to do with this yet. It's like the early stages of understanding right now. It's really discovery. There are a couple things we know, like, for example, if you have a particular variant of a gene in your liver, you might need more folic acid in your diet. Again, we know that caffeine, you may want to watch out if you're a slow metabolizer and maybe drink fewer cups of coffee. We know that with a particular variant related to saturated fat, you might want to consider a lower saturated fat diet. So there's a couple hints like this out there. And if you get a genetic screen, which is like super inexpensive nowadays, you can get some clues. but they're really just clues, because there is no do a genetic test and then someone hands you the perfect diet. And even worse than that, if there were, all the other problems associated with following a diet would come up anyway, right? There's this false notion that many of us have that, that's great. I'll take the test. They'll give me the perfect diet. And then what? How often, dear listener and viewer, have you had a diet, someone give you a diet, and you followed it for the rest of your life perfectly? You posted it on your fridge. It said to have this for breakfast, and you did that every day without variation. And lunch and dinner the same. As a coach, I'm not just a researcher in the field. I'm also a coach, and I've coached a lot of people. You always come up against the same problem, regardless of how well the diet is suited to your unique phenotype and genotype. Can you follow it becomes the question. The most important question, because the most perfect diet on paper is virtually useless if you can't follow it. So, with my researcher hat on, I'm so excited about the developments in genomics and nutrigenomics and what it means for our understanding of the human body. We just can't lose sight of the fact that I think of it like looking at the world through a straw. You look at the world through the nutrigenomics straw and you're like, it's going to be so wonderful one day. But if you actually take the straw away and look at the whole picture, we can't lose sight of the fact that we are human beings who will have other challenges related to living well, associated with the physiological needs of the body. And, that's the big problem we're working on here at Precision Nutrition. What's the process by which people can build the skills required to eat the way they would like to and need to live a healthy, fulfilled life?
John, you've coached tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, yourself, your team, through everything you're doing. Can you share some insights as to what you find in the difference in terms of how people look, in terms of the body types that people come with, the different genotypes that exist? We're just exploring this conversation, and thanks for sharing the background on that. Have you found some things that we can wrap our hands around that's tangible? Is a tall, skinny person different to a short, wide person in terms of what they need to eat, in terms of the fuels for performance, for health, for recovery? Could you share some insights as to the sort of the research or the live experience that you've found with working with so many people?
Yeah. Now, in this moment, what I'm going to do very tangibly is take off my researcher hat and I'm going to put it in another room because this is speculative. This is what we've practiced and learned from unofficially outside of the research journals. So whenever I talk about this stuff, the PubMed warriors will come on and be like, but there's no research to support that. And you're right. There's no research to refute it either. In other words, we don't really know. So you can either take my word for it or not. But I'm fully conceding the fact that there's no research on this. So, however, I started sniffing up this tree, just looking at and thinking about individual differences in phenotype and body type, right? You have some people who tend to be larger people, more overweight. They don't eat a lot of food, it seems like, in a day, but they hold on to a lot of body fat. And then you have these people who have like crazy genetics, like as people call it. They're really skinny no matter what they eat. Well, there's got to be something different between those people, right? Like that just makes sense. And then I ended up becoming really great friends with someone who was the exact opposite body type as me. And we were both into lifting and we became training partners and we would eat together often. And I started to notice this guy, I'm naturally thin, like I'm naturally ectomorphic, as they call from a somatotype perspective. I eat a lot of calories in a day and I really struggle to gain weight if I want to gain weight. And if I stop eating as much, I'll lose like 10 pounds in 4 days. That's my body type. I tend to be more hyper, more energetic. I pace around a lot. That's me. This guy, on the other hand, eats way less, holds on to body fat way more. If we were to travel on a trip together for a week, I'd lose 10 pounds. He'd gain 10 pounds. And his personality type is just kind of chill and, I don't know, sluggish at times or whatever. And I would often joke, if we use drugs, for he and I to meet in the middle, he would have to do a big stimulant, like cocaine or something, and I would have to smoke a lot of weed. And then we would meet in the middle, and that's where we could find common ground, personality-wise and energy levels and stuff like that. So you start to think about things like this, and again, not from a research perspective, but just from a general human curiosity. Well, it's different. And then you look at some of the differences in let's say, nervous system types. You can categorize folks like my friend as parasympathetic dominant. They're rest and digesters, right? They have a lower sympathetic response. And you can characterize me as high sympathetic response. And if you look at resting levels of cortisol and epinephrine and norepinephrine, they tend to be different between different peoples of different body types. So then you start to construct, or at least ask the question, how might their exercise need to be different for them to feel well, for their bodies to be improved? What might their nutrition need to look like to be different? So we started playing around with these ideas of different macronutrient splits for different body types. Now, this becomes like what we call a level 2 or 3 consideration. We don't enter into any conversation about this with clients until they've mastered the fundamentals. If you think of a pyramid of behaviors and habits, they need to build the foundation of the pyramid before they start doing things like body type nutrition. In other words, they need to eat enough protein at each meal, enough fruits and vegetables, and fewer processed foods than they might have eaten in the past. And they need to get their essential fatty acids. And so these are the things we work on. And then we work on, again, as we talked about, how they eat. So are they tuned into hunger and fullness cues? These are the skills that we build first. But once we get to that level, and for some people, we never have to go past that level, there might be more ambitious goals. And that's when we start looking at body type. And we start saying, okay, what does that ectomorph, that naturally thin, super fast metabolism person need? What does that endomorph, which is commonly called like the heavier set, hold on to more body fat, is more parasympathetic dominant, need? And we started playing around with a lower carbohydrate, higher fat diet in that endomorph, the larger, holds on to more body fat person. And we started playing with a lower fat, higher carbohydrate diet in that ectomorph, the faster metabolism person. And we started to see really positive benefits on body fat, on lean mass, on how they feel eating those kinds of foods. And we started to say, it seems like there's this relationship. It's an inverse relationship. So if you're ectomorphic, thin, lean, fast metabolism, carbs go up, fats go down a bit. Now, this isn't a low-fat diet by any stretch. I don't want anyone to misconstrue this. This is just a bit higher carb, bit lower fat, still getting essential fats because we know how important they are. Then you go to the other end of the spectrum and your extreme sort of endomorph, their carbs would come down and their fats would come up. And again, with both populations, not only do we see positive body fat changes and muscle mass changes, we also get reports that they feel better. The ectomorph, you put them on a low carb diet and they feel awful. The endomorph, you put them on a high carb diet, they don't feel very good on that either, more sluggish. So we start to look at this relationship and say, oh man, I think we can apply this. And again, we only apply it when people have built their fundamentals, but it's become this very interesting framework for us to look at body type, changing body composition, and also changing health and how you feel after meals and overall nutritionally. So it's been an interesting little cheat for us. I mean, not everyone can do, with our elite athletes, we do complete genomic analysis and microbiome, so their gut health, blood chemistry and food allergy testing, and then we match it up with phenotypes. But that's very expensive. We can only do that with a certain percentage of our elite athletes and clients. The rest, we need little hacks like this, like what we just talked about.
Now, John, we're hearing more and more as well about, it's not just about what we eat or about how we eat, but it's about when we eat. It's about looking at actually the timing of our meals. Can you share some insight on that? Is there a different process of nutrients or macronutrients that happen in our body at different times of day? Is that different for these different ectomorphs or endomorphs or mesomorphs that you're talking about here? Could you give us a little bit of insight on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, part of this was my PhD work looked at some of these things, timing of nutrients, for example, in the morning and around exercise. And I'm fascinated by this topic, but I should give the caveat again that this becomes a level 2 or 3 consideration. If you're not eating enough protein, not eating enough fruits and vegetables, eating too many processed foods, it doesn't matter when you time your meals. This is going to be irrelevant. You're going to be, as they say, arranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, focusing, or we often say, mowing the lawn while your house is on fire. In other words, you've incorrectly prioritized what to do next. Should have been putting out the fire instead of tending to the grass. So with that said, there was this notion that, let's say, the post-exercise period was really critical for the replenishment of protein and carbohydrates, or that, breakfast may have been the most important meal of the day. And what we're finding, though, is that some of these things were a research artifact. So, for example, a lot of the research looking at post-exercise nutrition being so important was actually done after people were brought into a lab, fasted after an overnight fast, and exercising. So they said, wow, look what happens after exercise. It's this critical period of nutrient uptake, and look how much protein synthesis increases and fat is mobilized. But what was neglected was the consideration that this wasn't just post-exercise. This was post a 12-hour fast and then exercise. So then we sort of, I don't know, in popular literature and in the fitness landscape, misappropriated the interpretation and said, oh, super important to eat certain things after exercise. Another fascinating research piece was done recently where, there's been a lot of conversation in the recent years about breakfast, partly as a function of a movement towards people trying intermittent fasting, but also I think as a backlash to this whole thing, you have to eat breakfast or else you can't be a fit person, and what this one particular research study showed that is that they took one group who normally ate breakfast and they had them skip it. They just fasted until lunch. And they took this other group that normally skipped breakfast and they gave them breakfast. And then they had a crossover where if you were in the group that got breakfast when you didn't normally eat it, later on they'd bring you back and give you breakfast again, after a period of time. And what they found was the conditions of breakfast didn't matter at all. You got healthier, improved your body composition by simply changing what you did habitually. And that was just like, everyone's head was blown. They're like, no, tell me the right prescription for breakfast. Is it good or bad? And the answer was these changes in what you did habitually, and also some small modifications of what you were choosing during those time periods made a big difference. And it had very little to do with breakfast or not breakfast. So, with all that said, once you've got your fundamentals built, once you're maybe then deciding to level up, maybe you're considering eating a different way for your body type. Now, again, there's very few people I've ever met who have their fundamentals solid and consistent, right? So most people listening to this, watching this, may be like, yeah, I'm at that point, I'm past it, right? Well, I'd say pause. Think about, do you do this consistently? Or do you have these gaps in the year where you're like, yeah, but it's a really busy time, so I'm not eating well now, but that's fine, I know what to do. That's a different scenario than, hey, I've been doing this more or less 90% of the time for the last 5 years. I'm getting my proteins and my vegetables and fewer processed things. Once you're at that point and you have the fundamentals built consistently, then we talk about this leveling up, and then we can get into nutrient timing. Things like, what do you eat after exercise? Are you getting a good dose of protein, moderate carbohydrate, lowish fat after exercise to replenish after what you've done? There's some conversation now about nighttime eating, like should we have our carbs at night or not carbs at night? And again, the research suggests it doesn't really matter that much. That doesn't really matter. I think the most important timing issue is what you do around your exercise. And then independent of that, everything else is really personal preference. And I felt the same way, and this is what we put in our free intermittent fasting book that I was mentioning earlier. There's this idea that we want to know if something's good or bad, intermittent fasting, good or bad. And the answer is, it's probably, if you do it well and you do normal eating well, not fasting, negligible difference. There's probably no difference if you do a good job at either, which I think is awesome. It's really freeing and liberating, because what it means is that you get to choose your personal preference. You can do either. Do you like breakfast? Do you not like breakfast? You get to pick whether to have breakfast or not. It's fine either way, as long as you understand some of the best practices. If you skip breakfast, you're going to have to make up some protein later in the day, you know? And if you eat breakfast, you're going to have to make sure that you account for those calories later in the day. So you still have to be mindful, and the whole diet is super important. But the neat part is, some of these details don't matter as much as some people have you believe. And that frees you up to do what your preference is, rather than adhere to some notion of goodness. You know, that this is a good diet, and if you deviate from this box here, tisk tisk, not so good, you know?
John, thank you for sharing that insight with us. And for the listeners on the call today, for everyone who's dialing in from anywhere in the world right now, what would be the main take-home messages that you want to share with them? What would you like to leave people with right now? So for people who may be sitting here wondering, how do I get started? And for those that are here, you know, maybe have trained for 10 or 15 years and saying, what do I do next? And how do I get the most out of my performance in my body? What's the main messages that we can, you know, take hold of right at this point in time and move towards that place of health and happiness?
Yeah, there's two things I really think are so important in this area, and they're so under discussed. One is what I call skill development. You know, nutrition, eating well, is a skill. It's not a thing that just emerges out of thin air. It's based on, well, I actually have a framework that I work on people with. You know, what we do is we put their goal at the top of a flow chart in a box. And then we say, what skills will be required for you to get that goal? Because losing weight isn't a thing you can do. You actually need certain skills, or eating healthy isn't a thing. You need skills to do that. And then we break down their goal into skills, and then we break those skills down into daily practices, because you don't build skill without practicing something, right? So this big, scary, what do I do to eat healthy? Can be a big tangled ball that's hard to unravel. It becomes easier when you say, oh, wait a second. All that really means is I need certain skills that I maybe don't have right now. And I need to practice certain things that help me build those skills. And if you can do that, sort of achieving your goal becomes very manageable, very easy. It just oftentimes requires a bit of coaching or some help. You know, the idea of, okay, but I don't know what practices to do to build those skills. Okay, but there's people out there who do, and they can help you build that. So that's the first one. You know, really, whether it's physical activity, whether it's sleeping more, whether it's eating well, skill development is the key. You need to figure out practices that build skills, and those lead to your goal. So that's the big one. The second one is this. Thinking short, mid, and long term about your health, about your nutrition, and about your activity. I'll give a quick example. I was having lunch with a colleague recently, and he was telling me how his secret to health and fitness was his low-carb diet and daily running. He was on and on about how amazing this practice is, and ever since he discovered it, it changed his life. And then I had to ask the difficult question. Why aren't you actually in shape right now then? And his answer was, oh, yeah, okay. Well, I just changed jobs. We just had our second child. The holidays were just here. So I guess I'm on a bit of a break. But I'm going to be back on the wagon again, and then things will be good, and then I'll be in shape again. You know what I mean? And many of us have had this experience. And we chalk it up to life getting in the way, or in some cases, if we're hard on ourselves, I suck. I didn't have the discipline or motivation to stick with it. But I actually see this in a totally fundamentally different way. I see this as he only knows how to get in shape in the hardest, most demanding of ways. And that is a short-term view of health and fitness. It means he will never be able to be healthy and fit in the long run. It means that when the natural things happen in life, jobs are changed, people get sick, children are born, holidays come every year. In the natural ebb and flow of life, unless he learns a midterm and a long-term intervention, and he builds the skills to be healthy and fit in those conditions, he's never going to maintain it. So his whole life is going to be a yo-yo of weight change and health and unhealth and health and unhealth. And he's never connected the two. See, in his mind, he still believes that the low-carb diet and the everyday running is the method. And he doesn't realize that it's that very method that's causing him to fail, even though it seems to work. So again, my sort of two big take homes are, it's always about skill development. You have to build skills through practices to achieve goals. And the second is, don't get so emotionally invested in a plan that can only work in the best of conditions, because it means normal life won't play nicely with it. You need to find ways to be healthy and fit and eat well on your worst day, not only on your best.
Beautiful words, John. Thank you for sharing that with us. And John, where can we find out more information about these things that you share? Can you? Is there a link that we can go to and listeners can go to right now just to find out more about precision nutrition?
Yeah, absolutely. Just pop over to our website at precisionnutrition.com. We have over 1,000 free articles on the site. You don't have to sign in or anything to get them. We just publish them for free. We get about 2 to 3 million people coming to our website every month simply to read what we have to say about behavior change, about fitness, about nutrition. We have some of the best experts in the industry in our company and writing for the site. So if you'd like to just learn more about this sort of practice-based change model, about what the best diet is, about skill development and mid, short, and long-term views of health and fitness, come visit us. We usually run an article or two a week, and they're pretty comprehensive. We talk about every type of diet that we talked about today, paleo, keto, everything. Or if you just want to pop by my Facebook page, I talk about stuff like this regularly. I post there often, and that's a fun place for me to share ideas with readers and listeners and things like that. So yeah, just, I don't have anything to sell today. It's just pop by our site, check out our articles. And if you want, you can check out my Facebook page at Dr. John Berardi.
Dr. John Berardi, thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom with us today and your insights. Thank you so much for joining us, for supporting this gathering of world experts, thought leaders, and innovators looking to change the course of the health and wellness of the human race, and for being empowered and actively committed to your own health in mind, body, and spirit. I'm Matt Riemann, and on behalf of all of us at the Personal Health Summit, we thank you for tuning in, and we wish you the utmost personal health and happiness in every day of your life.